Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan podcast on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos of the Pro Libertad Freedom Campaign. I'm an independent journalist and longtime Cuba Solidarity activist based here in New York City. And once or twice a month, I'll be bringing you a podcast from the international movement to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. On today's podcast, we're going to continue the discussion we started from last week's podcast with Ike Ham of New York, New Jersey, Cuba Solidarity, a Cuba Sí Coalition, where we were talking about the UN vote against the U.S. blockade against Cuba. Today, we're very, very fortunate, very honored to hear from Cuba itself. We're going to be talking with Richard Tur. He's one of the first secretaries of the Cuban diplomatic mission to the United Nations. Welcome to the Bronze Titan, Richard.
Good evening, Ben. Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And hopefully, a lot of people hear us today. I have to thank you especially for your advocacy and I mean your friendship with Cuba. We really appreciated that.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for Cuba's long history of solidarity and support. Para los Boricua, for those of us that are Puerto Rican, we consider Cuba la segunda patria. Don Rafael Cancel Miranda used to always tell us, Cuba is our second country. We have to support, we have to defend Cuba. And I'm very excited because, you know, this podcast is new and we've had mostly Cuba solidarity activists on, but we haven't had Cubans on. We haven't had children of the Cuban Revolution talking about what it is to live the blockade. You've lived the blockade. A lot of us have read about it. We've read articles, we hear people talk, but you have lived it. So it comes with such a special significance. So let's talk about that. Let's remind the audience again, what is happening at the end of the month with this UN vote on the Cuban blockade? What is that and why is it so significant?
Sure. As probably many friends and you also probably know, this 29 and 30 October, we would be introducing for the 32nd consecutive time an initiative like a draft resolution called Necessity of Ending the Financial Commercial Blockade Imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. This is essentially a resolution. It has been traditionally be introduced by the foreign minister of Cuba. In this case, our minister is Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla, as probably many would know. And of course, this is because of the fact of the high importance, high political relevance that this resolution has for us. It's not any other given resolution for us. It's a very special resolution, very particular resolution. Why is that the case? Ben, I think it's not because I'm Cuban, of course, and it's not because I'm really devoted to having this resolution being adopted. But I have to say that this resolution is special in the General Assembly. It is amazing. It's very impactful how the almost all the international community, except from of course the United States and Israel, vote in favor of this resolution, supporting the call of Cuba to end this blockade. And we have essentially the United States and Israel being isolated. This is not like a minor event. I mean, we are speaking that this resolution, countries that are close allies, like strategic allies to the US, as for example, the United Kingdom, members of the European Union, Australia, they vote in favor of the Cuban resolution. Even the closest allies to the United States recognize that the embargo, the blockade, as we call it, because it's not an embargo. Embargo is like an euphemism, a war policy thing. This is the blockade is more than that. It's more exhaustive and comprehensive. Uh, Even the closest allies to the United States recognize that the blockade is an abusive, incoherent, and it's illegal. So it needs to be finished. And if we look, it's, I mean, in the past 3 years, the resolution, in at least in our view, has become even more symbolical, more relevant, because of the very polarized international context we are living in. It's unbelievable how we've seen that there is like more antagonism in the international scenario in terms of international relations, more rivalries, and still when it comes to the issue of Cuba, it's there is no questioning about every country in the world, even those that are close allies to the United States, stand with Cuba in this just claim. This is special. It's probably one of the very few cases where people stand in the just in the fair side of history.
And let's talk about those numbers, because Richard, it's always one of those things that's so impactful, especially last year. How many countries around the world voted in favor to end the blockade, and how many didn't, and how many abstained?
Of course, first I would have to recap a little bit, Ben, perhaps for our audience. Um, this resolution, as I was saying, was first introduced in 1992. Of course, at the time it was a new initiative. It didn't have as many votes as it has today. But since, as the years go through, the amount of votes in favor of this resolution increased, even to the point where in 2016 there were 191 votes in favor of this resolution. And we need to remind our audience that basically the United Nations membership is of 193 member states. At that occasion, basically, just two countries didn't vote in favor of the resolution. Those were, of course, the US and Israel. But in that year, 2016, the United States government at the time, headed by President Barack Obama, decided to abstain. Israel followed them and did the same. So this was especially symbolic because, as perhaps many know, the government by President Obama was more of the standing of favoring a more civilized dialogue with Cuba, trying to foster some sort of cultural exchange. Of course, they weren't amenable to the views that the Cuban Revolution has promoted, but in any case, it was more like a respectful approach towards the Cuban society. So even that abstention was also like a message, a strong message to the U.S. Congress that from the executive side, from the government, there was this call to end the blockade. We might get ahead in our conversation of why it is important, like what are the roles of the how the government and how the Congress could impact on the lifting on the embargo. The thing is, like, we went from 99 and these 191 votes in favor in 2016. And last year, which was basically your question, we had 187 votes. The number, it's quite high. It's not the same as it was in 2016. We have some countries that last year weren't able to vote because of some rules in the United Nations where countries have outstanding payments, they lose the right to vote. So unfortunately, that happened to some countries. There's also we I mean we know that the situation around what's happening in Ukraine is also impacting the stance of this country towards our resolution. So these were some of the votes that basically are uh, in less that compared to what we had in 2016. But in any case, this is an extraordinary result. Ben, 100. We are speaking about 187 countries. Um, Considering, like as I was saying before, the tensions in the international context, the rivalries, we are living in a very unfortunate and sad international context. Seeing that basically almost every single country in the world stands with Cuba is basically a thing that has no equivalent in the United Nations. I can tell you, it has no equivalent.
Yeah, it's completely unprecedented. It's amazing to see all of these countries get together. Some countries that, much like the United States, their record with human rights is a little scary and a little doubtful. But somehow they come together and say that the blockade against Cuba is inhuman, unnecessary, and it's something that needs to end. It's again, I like to quote folks. Again, Don Rafael Cancer Miranda used to say that Cuba had a way of bringing families together, of bringing different communities and different nations together. And, a very dearly departed Cuba solidarity activist Frank Vergara used to say the same thing. Cuba has its way of bringing us together to work together. Every year for a long time now, there has been this resolution that the world community supports, but we don't see the blockade ending. How does that happen, Richard? What needs to happen in order for that blockade to end? You were talking a little bit about it with the U.S. Congress. Tell us, what really is that process?
Well, uh, things could be done, I would say, in a quite faster way if the government, the U.S. government, start taking some measures. There are some prerogatives that the president has, um, and of course, unfortunately, there are other areas that are more difficult to remove because, unfortunately, in 1996, through the Helms-Burton Act, the blockade against Cuba was enacted as a law. So the president can't remove completely the impact of the blockade as a whole policy setting. But the impact of the blockade can be significantly reduced by the faculties of the president, and we have seen that during the administration of President Obama. For example, a very first measure that we uh, demand to be done, and it's not just Cuba, it's again an important number of countries in the United Nations and government and parliaments, is the removal of Cuba from the list of countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism. First thing, it's unbelievable that we could have been classified as such. It's simply disrespectful to the dignity of our country, to the dignity of Cubans, to the history of our country. If you look uh, in history, like in the last 60 years, probably there are very few countries that have extended that much solidarity as Cuba has done. Uh, Even to the United States, we have people, like young people, studying in Cuba as medical professionals. in the Latin American school for medicine. But we have like doctors, professional uh, professional uh, people uh, providing also their services in 64 countries, if I don't recall incorrectly the number. Even we are in Europe, we have medical professionals in some countries of Europe because the expertise of the Cuban professional is widely recognized. So how could it be possible to think that Cuba is a terrorist country? And the impact of this measure is not just a reputational one. This basically has frozen all the possibilities of us to get credit lines, to make international banking transactions. This has even infringed into people's right, individual rights, because uh, besides the fact that U.S. citizens are more frightened to travel to Cuba, this is also having an extraterritorial impact on other countries' people, other countries' citizens. There is the case, for example, of European citizens that it was even acknowledged by the European institutions that over the last year, more than 300,000 European citizens lost their ESTA visas because they traveled to Cuba, and this is quite easily to identify because you know that nowadays all these immigration systems are like softwares that are connected the one with the other. It's not only in the case of European citizens, even in the Caribbean, we have seen cases of neighboring countries that have traveled to Cuba and then automatically, once they leave the country, they receive the notification that they lost their ESTA visas. This is a very, I would say, unfair. This is even a violation to the individual rights of people. Why would such a policy be impacting in the like personal matters of people around the world? That has no sense. And when it comes to the country, it has been devastating, Ben. The last since 2017, and this was a very, I have to say, hypocritical thing that was done. I would that was 2 weeks before leaving office. President Trump basically put us in this list of countries that sponsor terrorism, and then we've been basically reinstated every single year since then, and the impacts have been tremendous.
I want to remind our listening audience when we were speaking to Cheryl Labosh of the NNOC, the National Network on Cuba, there is absolutely no rationale for Cuba being on this list. Cuba was put on this list arbitrarily. Cuba has never attacked the United States, has never engaged in any terrorist action. There is no justification, no explanation, no reason why Cuba is on this list and why Europeans, Latin Americans, Caribbeans, people who go to Cuba are then facing consequences. I didn't even know that, Richard. They're losing their visas. They're just losing the ability to travel just because they're going to a country that the U.S. has deemed a supporter of terrorism, again, with no evidence. There is absolutely no evidence. Cuba has never launched a terrorist attack against any country, especially the United States. So it is, you're right, it's unfair. It doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. And it's having a real impact on Cuba. You're talking about how Cuba has been able to survive because of tourism. And now this listing now for the last couple of years has been affecting tourism in Cuba in a very real way. Can I ask you something, Richard? As someone who grew up under the blockade, whose whole life has been under this, what does that look like for a Cuban? When we talk about that Cuba's facing this blockade and it affects everyday life, you tell me, what is everyday life like for someone growing up in Cuba?
Of course, to summarize everything that I'm going to tell to you, I can tell you that this is a sort of psychological warfare what it's being imposed on us. As simple as that. Um, it's extremely hard, Ben. And as I was telling you, it's becoming harder in the last 5 years. Imagine like the feeling of uncertainty that you don't know how you would find some uh, or where you would find some groceries, some I don't know, some basic products for housekeeping, some sort of tools, everything. That and that's I'm speaking, just at the household level. I'm not even speaking about like macroeconomic perspective, because essentially this goes even to that level of basics, because providers to do business with Cuba, honestly, they have to go through a lot of risks. Who would basically want to do business with Cuba when they might be penalized by the main economy in the world? Is so asymmetrical. The thing of the blockade is that it's so asymmetrical, it's so abusive that even the US allies recognize that it's it's a monstrosity. If I mean, we're not speaking about a rivalry between the US and another big country, big economy, big armies. No, no, this is basically the first power in the world against a small island in the Caribbean. It's so asymmetrical that the impact in every day's life for Cubans, it's monstrous. It's tremendous. And we are speaking. I mean, I was speaking about simple things, but it gets serious, because I mean, you can live without that much variety of products. You can adjust. You can adapt. But when it comes to medical treatments, when it comes to possibilities for kids to have better learning, better possibilities, more IT, uh, to to develop. When it comes to also impact our capacity to help other peoples, because we would help much more than we do if we would have more capacities. Then it's inhumane. And imagine this combination of things: shortages in basic products, shortages in medicines and drugs, shortages in essential services, shortages in supplies, living this every single day, uh, seeing that this goes on since you were born, like it's my case, and then you see that uh, there are no perspectives of things changing. It gets like overwhelming. This is a psychological warfare technique. It's basically that.
It's a form of torture. It's a form of torture. And I'm glad we're talking a little bit about this, because I think sometimes when we have these discussions about the blockade, everything is about economics and political realities and perspectives. When we have to think about, we need to listen to Cubans talking about what it's like to not be able to have medicine, not be able to get supplies and things that are simple. And if you're a country that decides to um, trade directly with Cuba, you have the world's most powerful imperialist country coming after you. That's another thing that we forget about in the blockade. If a country decides, I'm going to do what I want to do and trade with Cuba directly and have normalized relations with Cuba, there's repercussions. The U.S. government comes out like the world. Many people laugh that the U.S. government considers itself the world police, where it does police the world economically and politically. Get into that a little bit, Richard. What happens if a country, if I am Mexico and I decide I'm going to trade directly with Cuba, I'm going to go and I'm going to do what I as a sovereign, autonomous nation want to do. What is the repercussion from that?
Sure. Basically, they have the capacity to do that. That's for sure. And this is the part where it's a bit complex, because there are mainly two acts that were promulgated in the 90s. I'm speaking mainly about Torricelli Act, enacted in 1992, and Helms-Burton Act, enacted in 1996, that basically demand for the persecution of any sort of commercial engagement with Cuba, commercial, financial, economic. That's why the title of the resolution in big part is a necessity of ending the economic, financial, and commercial embargo against Cuba. So basically, to give some hints of why, I mean, how this is being institutionalized in the United States, the Torricelli Act basically prohibits subsidiaries of the United States companies in third countries from trading goods with Cuba or with Cuban nationals, and also prohibits enacts this provision that third country vessels that have visited a Cuban port would be banned from entering the United States within 180 days. And this is something that it's quite easy to identify. There are even, I don't know if you know, there are even some websites where you can basically you put the name of the vessel, and it gives you the track, the path the vessel is going, real time. And this is like available. There are like platforms for people that have these sort of things as hobbies. Then the Helms-Burton Act, which is, I would say, the most harmful one, and it's difficult to have something even more harmful than the Torricelli Act. This one is the first thing. It like codifies the blockade as a prerogative of the Congress to decide on it. It removes the capacity for the president to basically remove the whole set of measures that make the blockade, and it has several layers, several titles, as they are in the law. The most harmful one is Title 3. It was so harmful then that since this was enacted in 1996, because of the reaction of European governments, basically perceiving this as a violation to their sovereignty, the United States government decided to waiver this Title 3. Basically, Title 3, what it entails is that citizens of the U.S. could open judicial processes against foreign companies or foreign citizens that could have business, commercial operations with properties in Cuba that those citizens in the U.S. would perceive as their former properties in Cuba before the revolution. This is something that it's completely distorted. First of all, I mean, how could it be assumed as legal that one citizen in a foreign country assumes that it has the rights on properties on a foreign country. I mean, the legislation of the U.S. is not valid in Cuba. Neither the legislation of Cuba is valid in the U.S. That's why countries are sovereign. So this is this first step is a complete violation to sovereignty of Cuba, unless there is an agreement on like some sort of reciprocities when it comes to the recognition of specific elements in terms of law. This is completely illegal. But then there is the second layer that it's even more monstrous. How would a citizen here in this country claim that it has the right to take to the US courts someone who's not even in Cuba, that is in a third country? So basically, it is because of that this Title III was waived by subsequent US governments until President Trump came to power. Then in 2019, President Trump decided to stop this waiver to Title III. And then since then, there have been more than 40 processes that have started in US courts to open demands to foreign companies that have had commercial operations in Cuba, like businesses, to speak with a general term. For example, one of the issues that President Obama opened, one of the ways of exchange of engagement President Obama opened with Cuba was the cruise activity. Before Obama came to power, American cruises and mostly every sort of cruises were not operating in Cuba because of the, I mean, what I've explained, the limitations imposed by the blockade and the intimidatory effect of the blockade. But when Obama came to power, he basically enacted a license for cruise companies to operate in Cuba. So then Cuba became like a really attractive destination for cruises. I mean, Cuba is a beautiful country, a beautiful island. Well, since this Title III came to power, everything was freezed again. One of the companies that has been subject to these claims is Norwegian Cruises. Probably it's known to you, like they have several commercials and stuff. Well, they have been taken to like U.S. courts because of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act. So it's completely abusive. There, I think there is no such country that has this very exhaustive and comprehensive set of regulations against them. It's and of course there is also these are the laws, but at the institutional level there is OFAC, which is an office in Washington D.C. basically focused on the control of foreign assets. They have a specific division to control assets related to Cuba, and the fines that they have imposed on several banks, several financial institutions, several companies. It's
and how they've attacked people that have gone to Cuba. They've gone and attacked those of us that have been in solidarity brigades, the Venceremos Brigade, the brigade from Puerto Rico. OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, has always gone after people and said, you're spending American money in Cuba. That is illegal, without proof, because they have no proof that we ever spent an American dollar in Cuba. So it's a very it's like you said, psychological, financial, political, and they do it in a very intimidating way. They make you think you're going to be facing the us being sued by the U.S. government when there's no court established for that to go through. But go ahead, Richard.
No, of course, of course. You are totally right. And one thing that I think our audience should also take into account, and I think the American citizens. I mean, in my engagement with my day to day conversation with American people, I mean, it's part of the daily life working here at the Cuban mission to the UN. It's been 3 years now that I've been working here. I mean, American people, American citizens like Cuba, and there is like regular citizens, and there is like a mutual feeling of like empathy. I would say we have similar uh, preferences when it comes to sports, when it comes to music, to food. You know, there are several things that, but then we have this anachronistic thing. You know, the establishment in political levels that basically impedes to get really close as it should be. And this country, one of the main features that it showcase to the world is the individual freedoms. And then this very same blockade that is being enacted and being applied with full strength by the political power in this country basically goes against the individual liberties and freedoms of its own citizens, not only the citizens of the world, its own citizens. So the blockade is even against the values that this country recognizes to the world. Why would they basically go after you, Ben, to see whether you were in Cuba or not? That's your business. Period.
Yeah, it's my constitutional right to travel. It's my constitutional right to
Exactly.
assemble with other people. That was some of the legality we used to use in the Venceremos Brigade. I have the constitutional right to go wherever I want. I have the constitutional right to meet and talk and discuss and learn from other people from other places. The U.S. government has no right to interfere in that, and that's one of the things we used to have to always push when we went to Cuba. We have the right to assemble. We have the right to freedom of speech. We have the right of travel. Now you're telling me I can't do that. Why? Why is Cuba a threat? A country, a small, tiny, developing nation that's 90 miles away from the U.S. coast, 90 miles away. Why is that country a threat to the
Mhm.
United States? It was always insane and made no everything. Everything never makes sense when it comes to Cuba policy. Nunca hace sentido. It makes no sense.
It's totally anti-natural. It's irrational. It's anachronistic. This blockade that we are still suffering.
And I think just to remind our listening audience again, when we were talking with Cheryl and with Ike, there are hundreds of resolutions that have been passed throughout the United States, various big cities, unions, human rights organizations that have all called for the ending of the blockade. And they represent thousands of people, thousands of workers, of teachers, of city citizens that have come out and said there is no need for this blockade to exist. So what Richard you're saying is true. The common no one walks around in the United States, especially New York City, saying, "Oh, we're afraid of Cuba because Cuba is
Mhm.
this big terrorist country." No, no one says that. No one ever
No.
says that. If anything, they want to go to Cuba. They want to see Cuba. They want to go to Cuba the way they go to the Dominican Republic or to Puerto Rico, to Mexico. They want to go see a beautiful island in the Caribbean and to spend time there. The baseball fanatics are dying to go to Cuba to see baseball games in Cuba, to participate in those, exhibitions. I have family that goes to Cuba because they want to go to some of the best dancing schools to dance rueda and to participate. No one is afraid to go to Cuba the way the U.S. government likes to say that people are. I want to, just to wrap up on this, Richard. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the work at the United Nations, um, does it take a lot of work to convince other countries to vote against the blockade? Is the cabildeo, is the campaigning very difficult or not?
You know, this is some of the most rewarding things of our work here, to see how much solidarity we receive. Of course, there is you, like the friends we have in the American society, in the U.S. society, that we see like every day in our daily life here. That they might not be associated as many of you are, but they tell you, I went to Cuba and I really like that. That's really gratifying for us. But in the UN, it's also very satisfying because uh, it's you deal with representative of basically countries from all over the world. So there is also the institutional level in that regard, and seeing representatives from basically almost every country to you know tell you, don't worry, we are with Cuba. Uh, we will support you. That's highly gratifying. I'm not going to lie. It also generates some workload to prepare this resolution, because having an extraordinary thing in the UN also demands for us in the mission to worry about how things are doing. Generally speaking, in the UN, it's also an organizational matter to see which day would be more appropriate to have the resolution, not to avoid having it, clashing with other meetings in the UN. Also, we have to be quite conscious of the dynamics. We know that this is not very likable to the US, and they have the means to press some people, some countries. This is also a matter that gives more relevance to the support we have. It's not like they don't care. It's This is not something. Uh, it's positive for the U.S. government, because which country would be fine seeing like the international community pointing at them? So we also need to be mindful of this. We need to be aware of what might be happening. But again, the overall sensation is that people tell you, we are with Cuba. Uh, so that's quite gratifying. Fortunately, it's not only about the blockade, the resolution that we will introduce in 2 weeks from now. Also, during the general debate of the General Assembly, which happens basically every third Tuesday of September. That marks the beginning of the General Assembly, when leaders come to New York, presidents of all the world, and prime ministers, foreign ministers come to New York. The topic of Cuba is it has been for the past 2 decades one of the most addressed issues, one of the most addressed topics by leaders of all the world. Last time we had 46. When I say last time, it's last September. We have 46 heads of state, heads of government, foreign ministers that demanded the end of the uh, blockade against Cuba, and also most of them demanded the removal of Cuba from the list of countries that sponsor terrorism. So having, being the head of your country, the head of your state, you have a long list of topics to address, and then you say Cuba needs to be on my list. That also shows like how deep is the solidarity we receive across the world.
Cuba brings us together. Cuba has this power of bringing us together. And folks, as we're wrapping up, I want to remind you, those of us especially that are in the New York, New Jersey, tri-state area, on Sunday, October 27th at 1 o'clock, we want you to come together to unite with the international community to end the U.S. blockade. Sunday, October 27th at 1 p.m., we will be getting together at 42nd Street and Vanderbilt Avenue. Again, Sunday, October 27th, 1 p.m., 42nd Street, Vanderbilt Avenue. Add your voice, add your solidarity to the international community demanding the end to this horrific, inhumane, unnecessary, world denounced blockade. Richard, thank you so much for being with us today. We will always make sure that we make a space for the voice of Cuba. A lot of us come from all over the world and we stand in solidarity with Cuba, but it is always important to hear from Cuba itself. So, mi gente, this has been your October 15th edition of The Bronze Titan. Once again, thank you to our brother, my brother, your brother, Richard Torr of the Cuban mission here in New York City, for speaking with us today. Thank you for listening. I'm going to do the YouTube commercial, folks. Please subscribe to this channel. Turn on your notifications, like this podcast, and share it with your friends. We're going to come to you once or twice a month with incredible content where, like I said, we will always be here to give a platform for the international community that stands together to end this blockade. Como siempre, Cuba sí, bloqueo no.